Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I want to talk about films because I don't know if you feel the same way as me, but recently the films just haven't been hitting. I don't know what is going on with the film industry right now. Well, that's a lie, I do know. They're not paying their workers a livable wage. But I feel like more and more recently over the years, films have just lost their creativity. Why are we getting 700 different adaptations of Spider-Man? I get that there's a big fandom for it, but when I want new original concepts of films, I'm not going to want to watch Spider-Man 408. And as much as I want new and original films, I will just as happily take adaptations of new concepts. And that's what this video is going to be about. So to any film producers that might be watching, if you see an idea that you like, hit me up. Let me help produce. Let me bring my creations to life. And maybe we can work something out. So in this video, I'm going to talk about games that I think should be brought to reality, because there isn't enough games that are films. We've only recently got Barbie, and that's not even a game. It's a toy, and it's halfway there. But I feel like you need to commit. So much books are getting adaptations, and I'm glad to see it. I mean, there's books that haven't been adapted. There's books that haven't been turned into film or movies yet that I would like to see, but that's a different concept. But I want games into films, and I've got a collection that I want to be seen. Of the 6 games I have compiled and given my thoughts on, some are a lot more concise and described than others. So let's get into it, and obviously spoilers ahead for any future games that I mention. The first, and probably the least thought out idea I have, is the game Jazzpunk. If you know this game, it will strike something in you. I forgot that this game even existed until I saw someone play it, and I was brought back to 2010 when this is peak 2010 vibes. Jazzpunk is a game that came out in 2014 and is this spy/detective type game where you are given missions and you have to complete them. And after mission went wrong, the director, forgot the name, he gets kidnapped, and then obviously the rest of the game is you trying to save him. That is the best way that I can describe the overarching theme of this game, but you will not truly understand the chaotic nature that is this game unless you play it. There are multiple side quests and dialogue bits that you have to go out of your way to find. There are robots, there are battle games against cars, there's a fly swatting minigame that you have to complete. Because of this, I think the film itself would have to be this sort of chaotic acid trip kind of film. And I say that because I think this would work better as a long-ish film rather than a TV show, which is ironic for me because I love TV shows and I'm a TV show gal, what can I say? But this time I think I will make an exception and it has to be a film. If it was to be made into a show, I feel like it'd be a very short form show with 10 episodes max. So either a short TV show or a long film. I think a long film is just going to give you the better price. If this was to be a show, then it needs to have a chaotic opening. In the game itself, the opening is very crazy colours and wild music, and I want to see that recreated. I want to see the bright flashes, the inverted colours, I want to see shots of the show itself and the missions, but just overlaid really obscurely, and it doesn't make any sense until you finish the show, or in this case, the game, I suppose. But it just really is chaotic until you understand the full length of what is happening. Regardless of that, I think the film/show should start with the main character in the big tall building currently stealing the Soviet consulate. I feel like there should be workers in the building that they're sort of interacting with, which hints at in the original game you're able to explore a bit more, but here we're just going straight into the building. So there should be people that have mini side quests and the detective trying to play along until he can actually steal it and escape, and that is where the sort of chaotic playing into all the little mini side quests come in. And then after they steal the Soviet consulate to escape, they go down the trash chute, which is what happens in the game, and it's a direct cut/follow-on from the trash chute into sliding into the big office. And the office is where they're given the next mission, which is the cowboy, which eventually leads into the whole big, grand, overarching storyline. Now, stay with me while I talk about the main characterisation of the detective. So the general vibe of the main character that I believe we should portray is this super chaotic yet smart and arrogant, cocky sort of detective where he knows his shit. Kind of got that Sherlock/House vibe where they know their stuff and they're going to be cocky about it, but they're also just that little bit more crazy where they know that they're a few sandwiches short of a picnic and then afraid of portraying that. Now in the game, after the mission with the cowboy is succeeded and is passed, he gets rewarded by going on holiday. Now this is where I think we should see more of the deeper side of the detective character. Where before we saw his cocky, sort of chaotic side, now that he's on holiday and he's getting a break for what seems like the first time in a while, he starts sort of opening down and settling down a bit more, and we get hints at a possible backstory, which, give me a second. But it's on this holiday where he starts to consolidate what has actually happened and break it all down, that he lets his guard down, and that is what eventually gets him drugged and the eventual kidnapping of the person in charge. And he resents himself for this because it was his fault, which also leads into his backstory. Now, this is what I think the backstory should be. So, in the game itself, there are mini games, like I said, and two of the most prevalent ones are this cake mini game and a pizza mini game. I think these should actually be shown in the film itself as a sort of nightmare that the character is having, but the meaning of it isn't really explained until after. Now, the pizza game is a zombified pizza creature that you have to kill, and the wedding game is collecting all the things to get married while fighting off these people. These should add to the backstory of the character, where I believe he should have been engaged, about to get married, and his wife is pregnant, but something happens because he is a detective and he's in the line of work where he's in danger, where something happens and she is killed, and obviously he loses his future wife and his child at the same time, and he blames himself for it. After which he turns to substances, which explains why, at least at the beginning, the film was a lot more crazy and chaotic, whereas now it's sort of settled down a bit more as he's consolidated everything that's happened. And while on holiday, he realises he needs to move on and that there is life elsewhere through what I'm thinking is like some random side character that he like met on the beach while on holiday, and he talked about how he moved on, and then the main character's like, oh yeah, I should do that too. And that, partnered with his director now getting kidnapped, he's like, okay, I need to step it up, I need to sort my shit out, go save the director, get my life back together and move forward. Regardless of how this is approached, I think the ending should have a bittersweet feeling. In the game, as the first person detective, you are eaten by a gatorized person. I think this should happen. I'm not exactly sure how we would describe, now that he's a little bit sober at least, suddenly a gator eating him, but I think it would be fun to end on him dying, but then having a post-credit scene where he's actually alive and inside the digestive system of the gator, which also is what happens in the game, and it's sort of this open-ended, he is alive and how is he going to escape? But it also would be interesting to see this as an allegory for actually getting the help that you need with substances, since he did rely on substances with his past, and now that he's going through this whole, I need to get better and I need to move forward for the future, it would be interesting to then see him possibly at this outward ending in the digestive system, moving forward in this really obscure way of him going through recovery. I know I'm making this a lot more complicated, but if you understand the game, then you understand what I'm trying to say. Some artistic choices I think that should be made with this film. Number one, a lot more action-based fighting. In the game, it is a lot more planned out and fleshed out rather than head-first fighting with people. So for the film, there needs to be actual action-based combat. The second one is the text that appears in the game. You can actually interact with it, like if you walk through the text, it will fall. That just seems fun to me. Like maybe in a combat scene, the onomatopoeia like bam appears, and then the detective grabs a letter and uses it to hit one of the other people. It's just fun and it's quirky, and I love that, and I want that included. Following from that, having some sort of voiceover of either the detective or some just random narrator in a sort of George of the Jungle-esque thing where you can interact with the voiceover person and make it this big overarching intertwining world of chaos and confusion. I want that. All in all, I'm just a sucker for chaotic media. Give me a show with 10 different episodes where nothing makes sense and I will eat that shit up. Like, even if this concept of just like mini games were taken and it was like a load of 100 different episodes with those little mini games in each episode for like half an hour, I would eat that shit up. It doesn't need to be a long thing, but as long as there's bright colours and chaos and music, I will eat that shit up. Now, if Cluedo can be a film, I say why not Monopoly? In contradiction to Jazzpunk being the one I did the least amount of work on, I did the most amount of work on this. Everyone knows how Monopoly works. You go around with your little players and you try and get the most money while everyone else goes bankrupt and I have to sell all my houses and I can never get money and I have to keep going around and keep going to prison. Now, rather than having this as a Jumanji-esque kind of story where you're just suddenly thrown into the world of Monopoly, we're already in the world of Monopoly. So I suggest a film taken from the vibe of like those 2000-esque gangster films, where there's this group of people who've been given the mission to get as close as possible to a certain person in power. They have to make as many connections as they can to this man at the top, and the man at the top is Mr. Capitalism himself. Now, Mr. Capitalism is a person that's been linked to a lot of nefarious crimes, gambling, a little bit of hush money here, a little bit of scandal there, and finally the FBI or police or some sort of magic force, I don't know, they're finally cracking down on him, and they need to do that by getting as close as possible to shut him in from the inside. Each character has their own way of trying to approach this big guy in charge, and with doing that, there's a lot of you need to prove yourself sort of fighting, as well as just general team fighting, because they're each going a different way and they're not really getting along, and each of them want to prove that they can do this by themselves, and it's that sort of independence thing, but in the end they obviously come together and it's like family vibes. Now, I'm pretty sure the game itself is restricted, depending on the game, from like 4 to 8 players. I think the best for the group of these take down badass people is 5. The main core needs to be 5 people, and each one, I will describe to you now, has a different role. Each character I have chosen to symbolise the little figures that you get in a Monopoly game. The first one is the dog. This is the kind of character that has that rough, snappy sort of exterior, a little bit cocky and arrogant. He would approach the big guy in charge as a businessman, saying that he wanted to buy real estate, trying to play that professional role, and hoping that the man in charge would see that and think, okay, let's take up this offer, get them working on a business level, and then eventually developing into a more serious and connected background, and you can take them down that way. When I'm speaking of this, I'm thinking like long con. This is a long time. I would say a show more than anything. I mean, it could be multiple films, but like I said, I'm a show person, and where it fits as a show, I'm going to say it's a show. I feel like this could be easily like 3 or 4 seasons. The second character is the cat. The cat is again another sort of snippy character, but in a quiet and reserved way. They don't act out unless they're provoked, which the dog does quite often. If I had to say specifically, they would be that classic black cat vibe, but they would approach the situation as a sort of eye candy, where they perform at clubs and they get the attention of a family member and get close that way, and then obviously through the family member they extort them and it works up to the higher ups and so on. It's also likely, knowing the media, that the cat is the one that will have a enemies to lovers sort of romance with the dog. I'm not opposed to it, but I think it's a little bit too cliche. Controversially, the third one is the penguin. Now, I know that the penguin is a whole Batman thing and he's the bad guy. We're getting rid of that, okay? The penguin is a good guy here, and he's the sort of reclusive one. He's the one that takes everything on by himself. He's cold, he's the loner of the group, he wouldn't really interact unless he actually really had to, and he would approach this as the sort of gambler who was able to take advantage of the system and that the big boss recognises and thinks, okay, you're smart, you understand how to utilise the system, we're going to bring you on board as working as one of our scammers. And that's how he would be worked into the group, and that's how he'd get way into the big leagues. But the problem with the penguin is that he works so alone and he's so reclusive that he would just take on so much work with getting close, but also with the fighting and everything, that he wouldn't let anyone else help, and then he'd take on too much and would feel too pressured. The T-Rex is the himbo that we all need. He's the strongest character objectively. He's like the buff, hot guy that everyone looks at. He's like genuinely the strongest. No one can combat him. And he would approach it with his strength as the boxer or as the bounty hunter. And the boss would want that and obviously take him in as a bodyguard and have him as protection, which has him already ahead of everybody else. And of course, the car, because all good films need a good getaway driver. More realistically, the car is the sort of joking character, doesn't take life too seriously, is here for a good time, not a long time. He's also the kind of character that is willing to work in a group. He takes very little convincing, if any. He's more likely to be the one that's like, okay, we need to work together, like, put your shit aside, if we want to complete this mission, we've got to work together. Super chill. He would most likely be working as one of the drug dealers, like sneaking things around to different locations and providing getaways for whatever activities the big gang is up to. I also think it would be so good to have the himbo and the jokey side character be the two that make that big sort of connection in the group first. Being at the same club, the cat would probably also be at the club, but they're performing, they're backstage, they don't really care about the bodyguard. Maybe there'd be a fight at one point and it's around the cat character, and obviously the bodyguard T-Rex has to come and break it up, and then the cat's like, oh, I could handle it myself, and he's like, bitch, it's my fucking job. But that vibe. But the ones that actually make a big relationship first is the getaway driver and the T-Rex, because they're obviously at the same club, so they'd pass, you'd be like, he'd be guarding while he's waiting for his new shipment, and it's just good vibes. Now the other 3 Monopoly pieces that I haven't mentioned will still be main characters, but they are main characters on the side of Mr. Monopoly himself. And they work as the main 3 leads that you have to combat and that you have to get past before Big Boss himself. They are like the final line of defence that everyone is ganging towards to get rid of so they can get to Mr. Monopoly. The first one is the Battleship. He works alongside T-Rex, or at least in that sphere of protection, where he is the number one bodyguard. He controls everyone else. He is obviously the main leader of telling people where to go, but he's also the main bodyguard for Monopoly himself. He is his like personal chaperone, next hand man. So if anyone is going to get close to him, he needs to go down. And T-Rex is obviously planning on taking over him when he can. There's also the Duck, who I think it should be this ditzy character who is also a performer and who the big guy has a bit of an affirmation towards, a little bit of a situationship, if you will, where they're not officially in a relationship because, I don't know, he has a wife or kids or whatever, but it's very clear to everyone that knows and that is close that this is his affair partner and he does love her. They're just not official like that. But because they're not in a relationship, it also means that there is that lack of protection and that lack of connection that everyone can sort of utilise and take advantage of the situation because there's less control around them, and that's how they eliminate them. And then finally, the Hat, who is also a businessman, but is a family relation to the big man. Maybe it's his son, maybe it's a cousin, it's, I don't know, someone really close who, when he dies, will take over the business. He is the next in charge. So obviously, to get him out the way and to get to the big man, you're going to have to go through him. And it's most likely going to be the cat that does it. Being in the club, maybe she seduces him and makes their way and they start this relationship, and then she utilises him and she gets all the fortunes. If something goes wrong, that's how she gets to him, through the family connection route. I also think it would be fun to include little mini characters from the board as like side mini character notes. For example, the police officer that is on the board could just as easily be the one that gives this whole big group the actual mission. And the prisoner could also be brought in to offer more information about the guy in charge for a lesser sentence or something. Little things like that like cameo pops in and it's like a fun little thing. The third game I would love to see brought to life is Franbo. Franbo is one of my favourite games. Franbo is a very dark and creepy game about a young girl who saw a very gruesome death of her parents and was sent to Oswald Asylum to combat that trauma of seeing such a gruesome death. She later escapes from the asylum and goes on this psychological adventure to find both her lost cat and her Aunt Grace, who she wants to live with, and is why she escaped the asylum. A feature that this game has is that you can take these red pills that were provided by the asylum people, nurses, I think that's what they're called, and when you take them, it will transport you to a different dimension, and everything in the world is different. It's much darker, it's much more scary, there's demons, there's weird creatures, and that is something that I would love to see in a show or a film. The difference between crossing dimensions and solving puzzles in the game alone is insane, but seeing the story spun out through this switching of worlds will be so cool. As interesting as I think it would be to work out the ways that we can have these two worlds collide, I think the main thing should be that she has to originally take the pills at the start of the film. I think it should be a show. At the start of the show, she has to take the pills because the whole thing is that she was put on the wrong medication and that messes with her, which partnered with all the trauma that she saw so young is going to fuck with her anyway, but it doesn't help. And then obviously when she stops taking the pills and she's still having these hallucinations and these two conflicting worlds, it shows that medication can fuck you up. With bringing up Franbo, I also feel like I have to mention Little Miss Fortune. They are set in the same sort of world and the same comparison could be drawn on, and I would love it if they did make it, or even Little Miss Fortune, but they add little details that link them together the same way that in the game itself they make connections to Alice in Wonderland. Love that. Bring up little things that like link characters. Hey, even give me an episode or two where she meets Little Miss Fortune. I would love it. On that same note, it might not be the same like game creation, but another game that gives the same vibe of this is Sally Face, which again I would love to see. That would have to be a film for me. I would love to see that as a film. It would be good as a show, don't get me wrong, and I will absolutely have that up as a show. But a film, multiple films in fact, I would eat that up. I did write down a proposal that we could have a show where Season 1 is Franbo, Season 2 is Little Miss Fortune, Season 3 is Sally Face, and each can be watched sort of on their own, but with like tiny linking features where like the characters go to the same place at a different time and they're sort of all overlapping, and then the fourth season would be them coming together in the afterlife and sort of defeating this demon once and for all. I would love that. If I can justify it to the end of my days, then I will, because I stand by it and I think it would be absolutely amazing. But in the reality and the recognition that things aren't exactly easy to make, especially drawing all 3 fucking games together like that. So I think it would have to realistically be 3 separate films or shows that have like tiny little links, and I would be happy with that. But still, the idea that I could have them all interacting and overlapping and then coming together, oh, it's like the Holy Trinity. Regardless of if there is an ability to have multiple games cross over or whatever, in the fact of Franbo, the final season should be an out of story, out of canon show where they have a fight against the big bad. In the game, there's a big battle, and Franbo manages to survive, but the demon to the big bad still goes unpunished, and it's sort of left a little bit open ended. I would love to see a season where they work with the game developers, or it's a solo thing, but they create a whole new branch of new content where they finally defeat this demon and they go on this whole other course. I would love to see that. And they bring in the characters from the other dimensions that they saw, and it's like one big battle and it's big and epic, and I love it. The general vibe of the show is very Alice in Wonderland-esque, where the world isn't what it seems, there's new creatures, there's new beginnings, and yet this little girl, Fran, is so young and she doesn't understand anything that is happening. She's just taking everything she sees as gospel, and that is how the show should be. But us as the audience should be able to draw comparisons and realisation that this little girl is going through some shit. Not only is she grappling with the fact that her parents died at such a young age, but she witnessed their death, which they were and put into pieces, be trying to avoid the detections. But it was so gruesome to see that obviously she's battling with that. And then being locked in an asylum where they don't even take care of you and they are giving you pills that don't work and that don't align and that are messing with you more. There's a lot of malpractice, they're not taking care of the people there. All of that mixed together to show you going on this adventure alone in the wilderness. You have all the elements that are also going to be damaging to you. The whole perceived notion to the audience is clear that this little girl is lost, is scared, and is going through this adventure, but the ultimate reality is that she is dying. And that is the dark element to it, that so much has happened and so many things continue to happen, but there's a darker side to them. Like the fact that she believed her parents were killed by a demon. Her parents were not killed by a demon, her parents were killed by her aunt. And having that dissociation and the inability to connect it, because why would you connect the fact that your family member is the one that killed them, partnered with this sort of imaginary friend that helps fly her around, which is actually just this sort of guardian angel. And the end of it is her surviving the battle with the demon and then going to a different universe, aka the further beyond. That sort of connection that can only be made from an outside point of view. And near towards the end, like obviously we can tell shit's going on and it's not what it means, but you don't make that connection until the end when you're like, oh shit, she isn't in a fantasy world. You know? It's just dark elements. I'm very much someone that enjoys a dark show or a dark film. I forgot to do my drink at the beginning of the video, my favourites.